Hello and welcome back to our class. We are continuing with social reproduction theory, and today I will be presenting the work of Nancy Fraser. I think I mentioned this before. I've been teaching this class to science majors at IISER Mohali for almost a decade now, and I think most of my students would agree that this is their favorite class, because in this class we bring together history and theory. So they start to see how theoretical insights are actually being derived from particular historical processes. And this class, I think, does that very well, thanks to Nancy Fraser. Nancy Fraser is a professor of social and political science and philosophy at the New School in New York City and has been widely recognized as a scholar of justice, and particularly in the way she defines justice as the dynamic between a struggle for recognition and a struggle for redistribution. So she's looking at the tensions between identity politics and struggles around meeting basic material needs. She's a Marxist feminist, and today we are going to look at her more recent work, which is around capitalism and how she understands capitalism as an integrated system, not just as an economic system. So I'll very quickly read out something that I think summarizes where we are intending to go today. She wants us to look at capitalism beyond economy, with looking at social and cultural and global orders and ecological. So she says, if you look at capitalism as an economic system, you don't see how it drives climate change, how it drives a severe crisis of social reproduction, sometimes narrowly called the crisis of care, how it drives political crisis, the hollowing out of public power. You don't see how we get a huge crisis of racial justice. All these strands are element of a single crisis of capitalism. If you don't see capitalism broadly, you'll think they are separate things and might try to address them separately in ways that won't work in the end. I think that's a very, very important insight. Most especially, like for example, if one designs public policy, or if there are administrative struggles, or if there are struggles around political rights or social, economic rights, cultural rights, then once you look at them in a very narrow domain outside capitalism or an understanding of the larger system, then they really don't produce the results that are intended. Very, very important insight. Very briefly, Nancy Fraser was born in 1947 to a mixed second generation immigrant family in the US. Her father came from a Jewish background and her mother from a Catholic background. And Nancy Fraser received her PhD from the City University of New York in 1980. And I've listed a series of her books, but I'm largely focusing on Contradictions of Capital and Care. That's not a book, that's an essay that I encourage all of you to read as an addition to the lecture that I'm going to do today. All right, so coming back to the notion of social reproduction, and we did speak about it briefly in our previous lecture, so I'm sure all of you are quite aware of what social reproduction means here. It is all that goes around in the backdrop in order to enable us to come to work, in order to enable us. In fact, most of you who are taking this course are right now sitting in front of your computers because perhaps somebody else is taking care of providing you your meals, or taking care of cleaning your space, and all the very basic things that are essential to reproduce ourselves, to make us ready for next day's work. So social reproduction, Nancy Fraser argues, and we know from our previous lecture, is a condition of possibility. It's an essential condition of possibility for capitalism. If labor is not reproduced for the next day, there wouldn't be wage labor that shows up to the factory floor. On the other hand, we also know that capitalism has an inherent tendency. It has a drive towards unlimited capital accumulation. Now, this drive towards unlimited capital accumulation tries to really diminish and tries to exploit, in fact, the domain of social reproduction. And this tension produces what Nancy Fraser and other social reproduction theorists have called a crisis of care. So this crisis of care is in the definition of how we understand social reproduction theory and capitalism. So this is an understanding of capitalism as such, an abstract form of capitalism. But what Nancy Fraser in that New Left Review essay that I am presenting today tries to tell us is that capitalism does not exist as such, right? That is a theoretical abstraction. Marx showed us in abstract how surplus value is generated. But that is not how society under capitalism functions. And society under capitalism is different in different regimes or different historical epochs and time periods that Nancy Fraser has referred to as historical regimes of accumulation. So she refers to state-supported capitalism. She refers to liberal colonial capitalism and the new financialized capitalism. So these are different phases or historical epochs in which capitalism takes different forms in response to the various historical processes, in response to the various struggles and fights for social reproduction needs in the way capitalism is functioning in that particular historical regime. So Nancy Fraser terms these struggles as boundary struggles, because these are struggles between the sphere of production and the sphere of social reproduction, where social actors try to get out of capitalism as much as they can in terms of taking care of their needs for housing, their needs for food, their needs for childcare, elder care, health care, all of that, absolutely essential needs for their social reproduction. On the other hand, production tries to extract from it, from wage labor and from the sphere of social reproduction as much as it can in order to enhance surplus value and in order to its drive for accumulation. So this tension, this boundary struggle between production and social reproduction shifts in each of the historical regimes of accumulation. Similarly, boundaries between what constitutes economy, what constitutes society, between work and home, between the masculine and feminine. As you will see in today's lecture, how historically the sphere of the home gets separated from the sphere of work, from the sphere of economy, from paid wage labor, and what consequences that has on gendered hierarchies. Conventionally, in the times that we are talking about, it is largely that women have been associated with the sphere of the home. They have been associated with the sphere of social reproduction for the care work that sustains all of us. On the other hand, men have been associated with the work sphere, with the economy, with paid labor, and are remunerated in the form of salary and money, whereas the care work at home is not remunerated in the form of money. It is remunerated in notions of love and bonding and all of that. But what that does is it creates a kind of hierarchy over who has power within that relationship, who is the one bringing in money into the home. And these tensions between these boundary struggles have shaped how capitalism has worked in the different regimes of accumulation. So let's see how that happens. Well, before we go into that, I want to, because Nancy Fraser uses the term exploitation and expropriation, and I want to spend less than a minute trying to define the two terms. They have very specific meanings. We've already spoken about in our Marx lectures on what he means by exploitation, and largely what he means is the extraction of surplus value produced by the wage laborer, but taken by the capitalist. Nancy Fraser writes, exploitation is mediated by the wage contract. The exploited worker freely exchanges her labor power for wages, that is supposed to cover the average socially necessary costs of her reproduction. So this is a very specific definition in the domain of wage labor in the context of exploitation. On the other hand, expropriation, she writes, expropriation by contrast dispenses with the fig leaf of consent and brutally seizes property and persons without recompense, whether by military force or by debt. And basically, she says the exploitation of free workers is closely tied up with and indeed depends on the expropriation of dependent others. What I mean by expropriation is the seizure of subjugated people's assets, their labor, land, animals, tools, children, and bodies, and the funneling of these confiscated assets into the circuits of capital accumulation. So it's important to remember those two terms as we move forward. The other term that I will use often in this lecture is core and periphery. And largely these terms come from what is called as world systems theory. The core refers to as the highly developed, largely Western capitalist economies, also those that have been colonial powers for the most part, and where the power circuits of global capitalism rest. The peripheries are usually the former colonies from which there have been extractions of labor, slaves, resources, capital, all of that in order to fund the development of the capitalist economy at the core countries. In the middle of that is the semi-periphery as per world systems theory, from where resources and labor are being extracted by the core, but then in turn the semi-periphery countries are also exploiting the peripheral countries. And now it's also important to remember that periphery, semi-periphery and core need not necessarily be situated globally on the world map. Even within a country, there is the core and the periphery, right? So just some definitional issues before we move on further, and I hope these terms are clear. All right. Nancy Fraser does not really talk about mercantile capitalism in her essay in the New Left Review, but I have also included it to give a background to the other regimes of accumulation that she has outlined and detailed. So mercantile capitalism is the early phase of capitalism in the 16th to 18th century. It's the time when the merchants are traveling around the world, largely also driven by oceanic trade and discovering new colonies and then establishing empire and colony in those lands. This is within the capitalist core, if I may call it at that time. It's also a time of primitive accumulation where changing rules such as those against vagrancy, such as those forcing serfs out of their lands and forcing them to move to the urban areas to work as wage labor. All of these historical processes are shifting the social relations that had existed and can be seen as a time where primitive accumulation dominated, including at the core. Expropriation, which is forcefully taking things, dwarfs exploitation because wage labor is not quite as manifested in the factories. The factories are just about to begin, and it's largely mercantile capitalism. Production happens at a small scale. So these are artisans, and you can think of them as what in India we have the notion of craftspeople, and this too conventionally used to be in small factories in what we used to call karkhanas, where the workplace, the potter or the shoemaker, the goldsmith or the weaver, the artisans would work in those karkhanas, but around those karkhanas in the same house, in the same complex would also be the residential quarters. So work and life or work and living were not segregated, and while there was still a gendered division of labor in the sense that maybe it was that the male potter made the pot, whereas his wife decorated the pot. So there was gendered division of labor, but they inhabited the same social universe. It was all inside the home. Work could go on, social reproduction could go on. One could do their artisanship while also mending their children and taking care of the elderly at home. Most people were subjects of the monarch or the ruling power, and care work was largely governed by customs and church and kinship in terms of whose responsibility it is to take care of what. It was still very much gendered, but like I said, in the same social universe, and there wasn't like a very strong hierarchy attached to it. So there were domains where women also held power, such as there was the authority of women as healers and brewers. And I've put this image up here to very briefly narrate a historical story of women in the early 16th century, let's say, and prior to that, were highly accomplished healers and midwives and brewers. So beer making, for example, was not something that was done in the factory by men. It was in fact done by women in the house. Why? Well, because beer is a high calorie food, and in times when famines were possible, there was insecurity and uncertainty in how things would move on and progress. Brewing beer at home and storing large quantities of it was seen as a safeguard, and so many women would brew beer at home, and sometimes when they had extra, they would stand outside the house, often wearing pointed hats, and at the top of the house there would be a broom to signal that this house has extra beer for sale. So they would end up selling beer. Many times these houses kept cats so that the mice don't eat the grain. And do you see here the resemblance with the motif or the image of the witch, right? The woman wearing the black hat, holding a broom with a black cat on her side. In the transition to the modern world, in the transition to what Foucault spoke about, the disciplines being established firmly, these more informal ways of producing and reproducing were dismantled, and many of these women were branded as witches and many times burnt alive for being witches. It was mainly their power as midwives, as brewers, that was being challenged. So in many ways, this was a time of immense expropriation at the core that transitioned to capitalism. But this had a more integrated way in which social reproduction and production were handled. In the next historical regime of capitalism, this is where Nancy Fraser's essay starts, and she calls this liberal colonial capitalism. She says the factory work is where exploitation happens, and there is exploitation at the core, but in the periphery and some parts of core, for example, rural areas, there is strong expropriation. So resources, raw materials, labor are being expropriated, slavery, and brought into the core for capitalist circulation. In the early phases, men, women and children as young as 6-7 year olds, largely thought about as more docile, as somebody who will not complain, were all enlisted into the workforce and were working in the capitalist core. So this was, with everybody in the workforce, this was an immense crisis of social reproduction for the working classes. Like if everybody is in the factory, who will take care of, let's say, the elderly at home? Who would cook the food for when one goes back? This created a moral panic for the middle classes because they saw this as one, the dismantling of the idea of a family, of an idea of a home, but also as desexing of the proletariat woman. And this was like unacceptable to most of the middle class men and women. To parallel these, there were a lot of struggles, boundary struggles to say, from both the middle classes but also trade unions, and this led to protective legislation. Protective legislation brought the women and the children back into the home, but with no means for them to survive in the limited amount of wages that their husbands received. So while the idea of the separate spheres emerges, women are supposed to stay at home, take care of the home, that home is not the place where productive labor happens. Productive labor should happen in the factory, and women and children will not work there. But that separate sphere leads to the inability of the working classes to reproduce themselves. This is the image that, these are the times when Charles Dickens is writing. These are the times when you see immense poverty, polluted industrial landscapes, especially in England, for example. The imagery is quite strong in many novels of the time, and the gender difference intensifies. Also the time when the notion of the housewife emerges as the woman to be staying at home, and the notion of male authority over the housewife to keep, the man keeps his house and family, brings home the wage, whereas the woman, the housewife, is meant to stay at home, take care of the home. The hard-working man will come back home, maybe from the coal factory and in a suit, but the angel in the home is there to wash his clothes. So there was ideas of a peaceful space in contrast to the harsh working conditions of the outside emerges at this time. But this is mainly possible in middle classes, in upper middle classes, bourgeois families, because it rests on the back of working classes at the core, but also the colonies. So in fact, Maria Mies was a German sociologist and has also spent and done research in India, has written about the lace makers of Narsapur, has coined the term housewifeization, where she talks about how housewifeization emerges on the backs of colonialism, and was only possible because of expropriation from the colonies to the core. And this wasn't a satisfactory condition for both the working classes and the middle class, especially women, because while the working classes were not able to meet the ideal of the separate spheres, the middle class women also were not happy, basically limiting themselves to the home, and therefore the ideas of emancipation, for example, we looked at the work of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, emerge around this time, asking to be done away with the shackles of this economic dependence. Many of these struggles from working classes, from the trade unions, from the uproar from the middle classes, and these feminist struggles, along with the Great Depression and the end of the wars, led to state-managed capitalism. So this is the next phase of the historical regimes of accumulation that Nancy Fraser talks about. Now, in this tension between social reproduction and production, capitalism draws the state in order to manage social reproduction on its behalf, and especially in the core. So, while even in this phase there is exploitation at the core and expropriation in the periphery, the state is enlisted to manage crisis of care in the core areas. So, state comes up with schemes of universal health care, public education emerges around this time, pensions come up, pensions that at least up until a certain point, even in India we took for granted, emerge around this time in the mid 1900s. The notion of family wage emerges, that the male is the breadwinner, but the male breadwinner needs to be given a family wage so that he can support his family. And the idea here from the side of capitalism was that a well-trained, healthy workforce can be reproduced in the next generation. So this was a small compromise made on the side of capitalism in order to ensure generational social reproduction. So that's how Nancy Fraser looks at this period. The family in this time period is largely viewed at not as a site of production, but as a site of consumption. The man will bring in the family wage and the family will consume by buying appliances. This is the time when the American dream, the one suburban house with 2 children and a dog and a garden, becomes quite prominent. And this heteronormative family, the man, woman and the children, is what the state agrees to support through various programs like loan schemes, through public education, and so on. But there are also exclusions here. There are obviously exclusions because this is all resting on a lot of resources and exploitation happening in plantations, through slave labor, through expropriated wealth from the colonies in order to fund state-managed capitalism in the core countries. Unionization is very strong and it keeps pushing at these boundary struggles in order to gain some more on the side of social reproduction. The periphery is very much gendered and racialized, and interestingly, Nancy Fraser calls this as a temporary phase where for a brief moment in history there was a class compromise, and maybe one could argue that democratic advancement happened in the core because of somewhat successful on the part of social reproduction boundary struggles. I've put up a poster here of an advertisement for a refrigerator, and if you go back to advertisements of that time, you will see a lot of this in the notion of women as the homemaker and how these appliances will ease her work. In the Indian context, as I was growing up, I'll still remember the ad for a pressure cooker with a man bringing in the wage and then buying a pressure cooker for the wife, and the ad said, "Jo बीवी से सचमुच करे प्यार, वो prestige से कैसे करे इनकार," right? So this association of the woman with the home was very strong, and the man's role was through wage labor in the big bad world outside, support the haven of the family, and the state was recruited to help in that process. So this too did not last for very long, and what we have now is what Nancy Fraser has called neoliberal financialized capitalism. This, she says, is largely driven by financialized capital, which uses as its instrument debt. And debt is used as an instrument to control and to force, let's say, force countries to give up on subsidies, to give up on welfare schemes. In the Western economies, especially Western Europe and the United States, neoliberal financialized capital begins sometimes in the late 1900s, in fact 1980s, and then carries on in the 2000s. In India, it very clearly can be marked by 1991 when we were forced by the IMF to bring in structural adjustment programs that dismantled the welfare state regime. This particular phase of capitalism is marked by relocation of manufacturing to low wage, low regulation countries where labor laws are lax, where wages can be low, so more profit, more accumulation can happen. There is state and corporate, so the Fordist model is dismantled, the welfare state is dismantled, there is corporate and state disinvestment from social reproduction. While there is women's emancipation, all of that, but there is also the fact that it becomes very difficult for a family to make ends meet without the support of the state, and you see an increased participation of women in the paid workforce. And the ideal at this time, in this phase, is that of a two-earner family where both family members are bringing in wages. What that does is that there is no one left to do the care work, the essential care work that is required to sustain as humans, but then also required to sustain capitalism. So in fact, Nancy Fraser writes that in this phase, the immense drive for accumulation of capital is in fact creating a condition where capitalism is eating its own tail. It is dismantling its own conditions of possibility. There is no one left to do the household work, to raise children, to take care of elderly. Healthcare is privatized, education is privatized. There is a new dualized system of social reproduction that emerges, which shifts, for those that it is possible, social reproduction responsibilities onto others. Mostly racialized, caste-based, class-based, those lower in the hierarchy. People, Geraldine Pratt's work talks about nurses from Philippines going to Canada to do care work for children in Canada when their own children are left to either fend for themselves or for the extended family to step in to care for them. So you see how global networks also kind of participate in fixing this crisis of social reproduction temporarily. I already spoke about debt as the main instrument for accumulation, such as dispossessing farmers, dispossessing workers through this loan. The subprime mortgage crisis is one example, and for disciplining states. Here I gave the example of India and the IMF. Another important shift that happens here is the redefinition of emancipation on market terms, where identity politics gains new ground. So you can free yourself as a woman or in terms of as an LGBTQ, but only by becoming part of the market economy. Like a woman can go out to shop but can't loiter meaninglessly. So very, very fundamental shift in how these boundaries are negotiated. So I will end here by stating that Nancy Fraser wants to remind us that it is not just the class struggle that is important to understand in order to know how capitalism works, but also the various ways in which these boundary struggles take shape in the various historical regimes of accumulation is important for us to understand as we gain understanding of capitalism, not just capitalism as such, but also capitalism as it exists in the social structures. So thank you so much, and that's our lecture for today.